NFTs and Web3 are finally dead. Hey, what's up everybody? My name is Moss, and in this video, I want to talk about a recent report that was released by Dapp Gamble, in which researchers investigated the current NFT market and concluded that approximately 95% of all NFTs are worthless. Now, the reason that I wanted to make this video is because there's been so much NFTs and Web3 have been such a controversial topic over the last couple of years. And after this report was released, I noticed that there were a lot of, TikTok videos, a lot of YouTube videos, and other news articles basically celebrating that NFTs were finally worthless. And generally, I would agree that NFTs that we've seen over the last couple of years have been pretty much useless. They have zero utility, zero inherent value. And then also the initiatives with Web3, like Meta and the metaverse, are just things that people are not really interested in and feel very useless and just like cons, basically. They feel like cons. And a lot of them have been like rug pulls and pump and dump schemes, just like the meme coins and altcoins and all that other stuff. And unfortunately, all of this really bad publicity has given Web3 and NFTs a terrible reputation, and for good reason, right? I'm not arguing that it isn't for good reason. But I think that I wanted to talk about in this video the things that I believe are still, that do actually have value with respect to Web3, and NFTs were kind of built on top of the concept of Web3, right? And I think anytime people hear Web3, they think of like Meta and the metaverse and, virtual real estate and stuff like that. And that's because like all of that was getting pushed out and advertised pretty heavily. But I think that what wasn't being advertised so much with Web3 was the fundamental concept and the values behind Web3, and I think what a lot of Web3 developers are currently working on. In this video, I'm going to primarily focus on Web3 and talk about Web3. I'm not going to discuss NFTs too much, but NFTs are heavily related to Web3, and they're built on top of Web3. And I say all this to preface my opinion, which is that I do think that Web3 has a place and will continue to grow in the future, but that there are a lot of misconceptions about what Web3 is. And I think for a while, I completely ignored Web3. I completely ignored NFTs, but in particular Web3. And I didn't understand it. I didn't feel like it was important to understand. And then I don't remember, recently I started to just kind of read up on it a little bit and get a little more familiar with the underlying technologies driving Web3, because it seemed like such an alien concept to me. And so I want to make this video as a way to educate you more on what I think Web3 is really about. It's not actually about NFTs and Bored Apes and all that other stuff. And maybe you'll come away from this video thinking, oh, okay, that seems more reasonable. That seems to make more sense than Meta and the metaverse. So before just diving in and defining what Web3 is and talking about blockchain and decentralized networks and all this other stuff that comprise Web3, I'd like to take a look back at the early internet and first talk about the history of the internet, because I think it's helpful when you have that frame of reference in mind talking about Web3, because it's almost like the internet with Web3, it's as if the internet is coming back full circle to its original form. So if you take a look back at the history of the internet, it started as a research project that was funded by the US Department of Defense, and it was called ARPANET. And the primary goal of the project was to set up a network between research institutions and universities so that those institutions could share information and communicate with each other over a network of computers. Now, being that it was funded by the Department of Defense, that wasn't the only goal. of the project. There were some alternative goals. Now, I don't know all of the details of that project, so any of you history buffs out there, hear something that I'm saying that is incorrect, feel free to comment and correct me in the comments. And so in the early iterations of ARPANET, the nodes in the network were utilizing dedicated phone lines to transfer data between each other, and they were connecting directly with one another. So this was a decentralized network of computers that were sharing data independently, and data was decentralized. It was not centrally hosted. So I want you to keep that in mind as we, continue the discussion. Now, let's roll forward in history a little bit to the introduction of personal computers. When personal computers came out, similarly, you had a decentralized network of computers that was making up the internet. And if you wanted to talk to someone who had a personal computer, you would talk directly to that person's computer. If you needed files or data that someone was hosting on their computer, you would have to connect. So it was like a peer-to-peer network where the nodes in the network were talking directly to each other and sharing data directly with each other. So data wasn't being hosted in some central location. It was being hosted on each node in the network. And I'm talking about the days of like dial-up modems where people were utilizing their telephone lines in order to transfer data and connect to the internet. This is even before email was available. And as you move further in time, you had the introduction of services that expanded on this idea of peer-to-peer communication, like services like LimeWire, which many of you might remember, where you could download songs, and those songs were being hosted on other nodes in the network. So nodes in the network could connect to LimeWire and host various files that were on their computer so that other people could download them, right? And so this was an example of peer-to-peer communication in a decentralized network. Now, right around the .com bubble, and maybe a little bit after that, what you started to see was a shift in how data was being stored on the internet. And in particular, if you look at websites like MySpace, for instance, and even before MySpace, this was being used, but things like a username and password so that you could have an account on a website. And this is where I think the internet started to take a turn for the worse. So initially it started with a username and password. So if you wanted to create an account for a site, you would enter your username and password, and then the username and password wouldn't be stored on your computer because that wouldn't be a robust solution. If your computer got lost, stolen, destroyed, then your username and password would be gone. Your account would be gone on the website. So these web services like MySpace, for instance, would have their own infrastructure that would be hosting the data related to your account. And this is where that peer-to-peer decentralized network started to break down. That was kind of like the original form of the internet. And what we saw with like MySpace and Facebook was that there was all of this data being generated about the users that were using those applications, and those companies were hosting that data on their own infrastructure and on their own servers. So what you saw over a period of like 10 years was this centralization of hosting of user data, and it was siloed as well, right? You had a Facebook account, you had a MySpace account, you had a Twitter account. For each of those accounts, you had different account identities. A lot of times people use the same username across platforms, but not always. And these different platforms obviously don't share their user data across the internet. So you have these silos of data that are owned by companies and services like MySpace and Facebook. And the problem is that a lot of these services have become very important in our lives because they have important and valuable data about us or related to us. For instance, if you look at, your iCloud account has all of your personal photos and, meaningful memories, right? And they're centrally hosted by, Apple Apple's data centers and Google data centers and AWS data centers. And these companies they essentially own that data, right? Those servers could blow up at any moment and you would lose all of that data. Now, granted, the chances of that are, astronomically low because they're distributed across the entire world and replicated, but it is a possibility that either they get, hacked, right? And the data is gone, or the actual servers are destroyed and the data is physically destroyed. But those threats assume that the company has your best interest in mind, which they don't. And all of these companies like Facebook and Twitter and other companies, offering social media services and personal services like your Google account, your Gmail account, right? They're taking your data because it's very valuable. Your data creates a pattern and creates a profile about you, which they can then use to advertise things to you, right? And so they sell your data to the highest bidder and use that data to, have targeted ads and services. And the other thing is that if for some reason you fall out of graces with them and they just don't like you, they could close your account in an instant and you could lose your data, right? They could lock you out of your account. They could make it very difficult for you to access other services. For example, if you were to lose your Google account or maybe your Facebook account, I think a lot of people use the federated login on a lot of other services, right? You go to a website, it says, use Google to log in, right? So if your Google account is gone, there might be a lot of other services that had federated login that you wouldn't be able to log into anymore, right? So they have, even though that I haven't really heard of anyone getting locked out like that, they do have that. They have that power over you, and they have that power over your data and the services that you can access. So to kind of summarize the issues with the current state of the internet, which is Web 2.0, it's that we have our data is not really owned by us. It's not hosted on our own infrastructure. It's not hosted on our computer, so we don't really own it. And on top of that, the data is fragmented and siloed and duplicated when we don't want it to be duplicated. You have the same information like your address, your personal data, replicated across various services like Facebook and Google, and they don't share data. So you have data that's siloed according to all of the services that you utilize. It's not likely that a natural disaster happens and takes out all of the data centers that are hosting your iCloud data, and you lose your iCloud data because of some natural disaster. But what is more likely is that you, for whatever reason, get locked out of your account, you're banned, maybe the company doesn't agree with the content that you're posting online, or maybe the company gets hacked and you lose your data that way. Another big problem is privacy. Your data and behavior on the internet interacting with these services is being closely tracked, and then all of that data is being sold and used to sell things to you. If you have location services turned on, they know how long you stay in your house versus how long you stay in the office, and what restaurants you like the most. They have all of this data, and they say that it's because it improves your experience working with these services, which to an extent it does, but that's not their number one priority. Their number one priority is finding out more information about you so that they can sell that data and sell more things to you. And the big problem with that is you're not getting paid anything for your data. You get to use their services for free, like Gmail, for instance, which is a plus. But at the same time, your data is extremely valuable, and you're not getting a penny for any of that data that you're handing over to some of these big services. So now that we have an idea of the problems with the current Web 2 internet, let's talk about Web 3 now. The primary motive driving Web 3 and the technologies behind Web 3 is the desire to move the internet back to its original form, which was a decentralized network of nodes, facilitating peer-to-peer communication and sharing data directly with other nodes in the network, rather than having data centrally hosted by companies like Google and AWS in large data centers, and having them facilitate and be kind of the custodians of our data, right? And so when you're utilizing services like Gmail or Google Drive, you're putting your files and your data on Google servers, and then if you share them with other people, those people are downloading them from Google servers. They're not downloading them from your computer. So the idea of Web3 is to change that, get rid of the middleman that's centrally hosting all of our data, and go back to just sharing data directly with each other. Now, initially, when you think about this, it's like, well, that doesn't sound like a very robust solution, because again, what if like I have data on my computer and then my computer gets lost or stolen or destroyed, then the data is just gone. Like that's not very good. If I put it on Google Drive, then it's going to be guaranteed always on Google servers, and I'll never lose that data. Well, the evolution of Web3, building on the original form of the internet, has the idea of decentralized storage as well. So rather than having your data stored on your computer, it's stored across the network of nodes that make up the decentralized network, and it's stored on those nodes in an encrypted format, and the data is sharded and replicated. So sharding means if you have one file, that file gets split up into maybe 3 pieces, and each of those pieces are hosted on different nodes in the network. And then even those shards, those pieces will be replicated, and those replications will live on even more nodes on the network in an encrypted format. And in this way, you have the resiliency and the reliability and the integrity of the data maintained just like it would be on a service like Google Drive. But the difference is that, these are not, your data is not being centrally hosted and owned by some company. Instead, you still have full ownership over that data. You can remove it from those nodes, and you can remove it from the decentralized network. And there's not really any way that you would be locked out from accessing your data. The data would always be available to you, unlike with a Web2 service where your account could get banned and then you no longer have access to the data being hosted on that service, or maybe they just delete it after they ban your account. So what are some use cases of Web3 that could provide real value for just the average user on the internet? Well, for one, it would be really nice to have a single identity on the internet that isn't owned by any service, that I can use across all services on the internet. And by that, I mean having a decentralized identity, and that identity profile lives on a decentralized network. So it's not owned by anyone. I am the sole owner of that decentralized ID, and I can log into any service that I want to and create an account on any service that I want to using that decentralized ID. If you think about what your online identity is right now, for a lot of people, it's like your Gmail account, right? Your Gmail account kind of represents your online identity, and it's probably something you use in order to create a lot of, online accounts, or maybe you just use federated login, like when you go to a website and it says login with your Google account, and you don't even have to create an account. They just kind of use the federated login with Google in order to create an account for you, right? But again, the problem is that your account with Google could be lost at any moment. You don't really own that account. And so to have a completely decentralized identity that lives independent of any of these Web2 services like Meta and Google, etc., is valuable. And you are not going to be forced to create different profiles. So again, like you log into some of these services and you do need to provide like your shipping address, for instance, right? If you're on eBay, that data shouldn't be just like duplicated across all of these services. You should have that data on a decentralized network and then be able to choose to share it with services that you want an account on, right? You shouldn't have to like enter the same data in each one of these services. That's ridiculous. The same goes for someone who's searching for a job. if I want to, share my resume with different companies or even on different websites like Glassdoor and Indeed, right? I shouldn't have to upload my resume to those individual sites. I should be able to just point them to some location on a decentralized network and say, this is where my resume is hosted. This is where my personal information is hosted. That's where I want you to go to pull my resume. Another use case that I can think of as a content creator that would be very valuable is, as a content creator, I'm constantly trying to grow my following on all as many platforms as possible, right? You want to have like a very broad reach on each platform, but it's difficult to do. And growing your following on a platform requires a lot of effort. And you'll notice when you watch creators like on TikTok, and I do this as well, is that they'll try to, they'll have like a call to action right in the video and say, well, if you liked this video, check out more videos on my profile on TikTok, but also you should check out my YouTube channel, right? And it's not a guarantee that the viewer is going to go to YouTube and then follow and subscribe on YouTube, or go from YouTube to TikTok. So if you think about this problem from the perspective of Web3, this actually becomes, this gets solved very easily. So rather than having followers or subscribers on each platform, instead what you would have is like some standardized format, data format of what a like follower or a subscriber is, and that would be associated with you on a decentralized network. And then your following would just be the same across all platforms, right? And you wouldn't need to grow your following on a particular platform. If someone follows you, they are following you on all platforms, essentially, if they're following you from like a decentralized network perspective, right? They're not just following you on YouTube or just following you on TikTok. And another thing that happens with content creators is that they will try to migrate off of a service like YouTube, for instance, and try and direct folks to like a personal website, and they'll host the content on the personal website, or they might switch platforms. Like for instance, some streamers who are Twitch streamers will switch over to a different service. I think it's called Kick, or I forget what the other streaming service is, or maybe they'll switch over to YouTube streaming and back and forth, right? And when they switch, they have to like try to kind of bring their followers over to that platform, which is a really hard thing to do. And so when you, again, when you look at this from the perspective of Web3, that problem almost, goes away, because if you have followers as this, this data structure that is decentralized and not tied to a specific service, the concept of a follower or a subscriber is common across all of these servers. It should be okay to have like a standardized high-level format of what a follower is, and that should be available. That data shouldn't be tied to a specific service. It should be hosted on, a decentralized network. So these are some of the things that, I think about when I'm thinking, when I think about Web3 and the value that it could offer. I think it'll continue to get bigger, although it's very early on. It's still very early on, and it has a ways to go. And I think, unfortunately, over the last couple of years, it got a really bad reputation from all of these like NFT scams and what big companies like Meta did with the metaverse. And I just think that it will take time for it to improve that reputation, but it still has a place. And I think that the values of Web3 are something that people will recognize as people become more concerned with their data privacy and ownership over their data. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please consider throwing a like on the video and subscribing to the channel for more videos like this. Thanks for watching.